Have you ever stopped to ponder the safety of your hard-earned cash tucked away in your local bank? Well, just last March in 2023, we witnessed a tsunami of bank collapses that shook the financial world, especially in the US. Banks like Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and even Credit Suisse in Switzerland took a nosedive. Today, we are diving deep into the realm of small banks to uncover why they might be teetering on the edge of collapse again. How it's going, folks? I'm Jun, a researcher from Dxpert. The health of the US banking system always steals the spotlight. Being the powerhouse of the global economy, what happens in the US ripples across the world. Now, let's dive into the latest report from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. In the first quarter of 2024, US banks collectively rake in a mind-blowing $64.2 billion in net income. That's a jaw-dropping 79.5% surge compared to the previous quarter. But wait, before you pop the champagne, there's a storm brewing for small banks. They are taking a beating from rising interest rates and facing a mountain of unrealized losses, tallying up to a jaw-dropping $517 billion. These losses stems mainly from their investments in residential mortgage-backed securities. Building on the perspective from my last episode, let's take a closer look at a troubling trend, the surge in mortgage delinquencies since 2021. Back in the later half of that year, the delinquency rate was a mere 0.27%. Fast forward to now, and we are witnessing a staggering increase, with rate shooting up to 0.91%. That's more than a threefold jump. This alarming uptick is casting a dark cloud over the housing market as more and more homeowners struggle to stay afloat with their payments. So, why are small banks feeling the heat more than their larger counterparts? Firstly, small banks have a hefty chunk of their loan portfolio tied up in commercial real estates or CRE loans. In fact, these loans make up a whopping 45% of their total loans, whereas for the big players, only have about 13% invested in CRE. Now that's a pretty big gap, and it's getting even more interesting since 2019. Small banks have been on a lending spree, with CRE loans growth skyrocketing by a jaw-dropping 45%. Meanwhile, the larger banks have been playing it cool, with just a measly 2% increase. But here's where it gets tricky. Banks like New York Community Bank, which have surpassed the 300% threshold of CRE loans to total capital, are potentially on the radar for some regulatory scrutiny. Time isn't exactly on the side of these small banks either. Net charge-off are climbing as higher interest rates start squeezing some borrowers. But hey, let's put things into perspective. I see this more as a normalization rather than a full-blown deterioration at this point. However, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. A prolonged high interest rate environment could spell trouble, especially for clients grappling to keep up with debt at current borrowing cost. With the Federal Reserve turning up the heat on short-term interest rates to tackle inflation, banks are playing it safe by tightening their underwriting standards. But here's where it gets interesting. Recent quarters have thrown us a few curveballs. Think NYCB's commercial real estate charge-off in Q4 and First Horizon's specific loss in Q3. And let's not forget Truist, whose Q1 net charge-off ratio hit its highest point since Q4 of 2011. According to the FDIC, net loan losses in Q4 amounted to 64 basis points of average loans, up from 54 basis points in Q4 of 2019. That's a benchmark from the pre-pandemic era. Over the past 2 decades, losses have typically hovered around 82 basis points. Although recent economic data might be showing some weak spots, which isn't exactly surprising given the rising delinquencies and slowing job growth that would increase interest rate cuts expectations. But here's the kicker. This isn't a problem that's going to disappear overnight, especially with interest rates expected to remain stubbornly high to keep inflation in check. Now, if these banks find themselves in a pinch and need to raise cash in a hurry, offloading these securities at a loss could spell disaster. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. What does all this mean for small businesses and regular folks who rely on these banks? Well, brace yourself for some unfortunate news. the uptick in problem banks could be signaling potential insolvency. And guess what? This instability could make it tougher for these banks to do what they do best, which is lend money, turn a profit, and keep the cash flowing. A trifecta of trouble that feels all too familiar from past crises. It begs the question, have smaller banks learned anything from their previous brushes from disasters, including the recent spate of collapse and the colossal subprime mortgage meltdown of 2007 and 2008? The number of banks on the problem bank list, which are those scoring a worrying 4 or 5 on their Camel's rating, jumped from 52 in late 2023 to 63 in early 2024. Despite this uptick, these trouble banks only account for 1.4% of all banks, staying within the normal 1 to 2% range typically of non-crisis periods. While small banks are feeling the heat, the FDIC reassures us that the overall US banking system isn't on the brink of collapse. However, with inflation, turbulent stocks market, and geopolitical tensions swirling, the financial landscape remains anything but calm. In contrast, the big players in the banking world seems to have their act together. They have minimized their exposures to risky CRE's loan and padded their reserve to brace against potential defaults. Take KeyCorp and Fifth Third, for instance. These banks have dialed down their CRE lending since the last financial meltdown, positioning themselves on much steadier ground. To wrap things up, small banks are once again navigating choppy waters thanks to commercial real estate loans and rising interest rates. Meanwhile, big fish in the banking pond are cruising along, much better equipped to weather the storm. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found today's video insightful. Everything I've shared comes from a mix of research and my own perspective. Remember, when it comes to trading or investing, always do your own homework and stay aware of the risk. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please subscribe, share, and hit the like button. You can quickly access to all our channels by scanning the QR code. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next episode.